My next question, Imam, is about gender segregation in Islam, especially in places of worship. I suppose if we did not have this strict gender divide, then we wouldn't have to deal with this question. Where do transgender people sit in the mosque? In which row do they have to stand or pray? Can you speak about this perhaps a little bit and give us some scriptural guidance on these issues?
So when we look at the collection of prohibited things in terms of gender segregation, such as mixed social gatherings, touching of a woman who's not your relative, the modesty of a woman in terms of her dress code and her public behavior, the voice of a woman, voting in Islam, for example, all of these have been instituted to prevent zina and fahisha, so adultery, fornication, public indecency. And none of these restrictions are explicitly mentioned in the Quran. So, for example, where the Quran mentions "La taqrabu zina," do not approach zina, it's a broad stroke, right? And so the scholars would then try to explain the practical application of these verses, or this kind of verse, and they would opine about what is permissible and what is not. And the opinions and the religious judgments were based on their subjective experience, their subjective experiences as men, how they see the world through their own particular cultures and through the times that they were living in. But today the world has changed. People have evolved. And the needs of humanity is different. Mm-hmm. And so the religious rulings then would have to also evolve to serve this particular time. Now, we never had to examine gender to the extent that we are now doing in the 21st century, because prior to the 21st century, gender was only understood within this binary, right? And anything between that needed to be rectified. Right? There was something wrong with them. And we still see this kind of mindset amongst some of our scholars in the way that they formulate fatwas, for example, trying to fix transgender people instead of addressing the needs of transgender people or consulting with them. Now, transgenderism and homosexuality are not contemporary phenomena. They've existed since time immemorial. And it's just that in our time, people are more conscious of their human rights, their right to not be defined by socially constructed ideas or beliefs, their right to self-expression, for example. And so they are pushing back against cultural and religious dictates that seem to prevent them from having a true and authentic life experience. Now, it would be a futile exercise to try and get humanity to conform to this unflinching religious order, which is actually man-made, instead of making religion workable by having religion serving the needs of people and not the other way around. Because, I mean, that's the primary function of religion, right? So if we look at the question about where do transgender people sit in the mosque or in which row they should be praying, if I try to answer this kind of question in reference to our classical scholarly opinions and the schools of thought, then I'm only going to be perpetuating this binary conformity. And then you as a transgender person would then have to fit into that. Instead, what I think that the scholars or religious leaders should do instead is to consult with transgender people, to ascertain their needs, and still holding true to the tenets and the principles of our faith, but providing ease of access and providing a practical solution. And I think change is uncomfortable. But if you as a scholar or a religious leader can help a transgender person to remain true to who they are and to still maintain their faith, then you've done your job. Now, as a transgender person, if you want to know where you should be sitting in a mosque or which row you should be standing, I would say that if you want to participate in a mainstream mosque that still segregates between the genders, and you have completely transitioned, let's say from a male to a female, then you should be sitting with the females, not because you're identifying with them, but because you don't look like them, right? You're not going to win an argument in a mainstream setting insisting that you have the right to self-definition and therefore have the right to sit wherever you choose to. It's not going to work in a mainstream setting. That you can do in an inclusive mosque like Al Ghurba Foundation or the Jummah Circle or the Muslim for Progressive Values inclusive mosque spaces. So therefore, I think it's important that transgender people and gay people should seek out these non-segregated spiritual spaces, or if there's not any, that they should create one in the area.
Another debate that I picked up in the Muslim community in South Africa today is the question, who should wash the body of the transgender Muslim?
I don't know why this would be such a complicated issue. I mean, the washing of the dead body of a transgender person, or any person for that matter, should be done by the nearest and dearest of that person, the close relatives or the closest friends who can help to protect the honor and the dignity of that person. And if the transgender person presents any physical features or the private parts of, let's say, a woman, then it makes sense that that person should be washed by it, right? And vice versa. So hence, I think it's very important that the nearest and the dearest of the person should then wash the body. And again, I cannot quote any classical opinions here because I would then just be reinforcing this gender binary, and I don't think that would be solving the problem.
But I think it would be imperative in finding practical solutions and in holding true to our faith to re-examine our Islamic jurisprudence and to be comfortable with the change that it requires so that we not inadvertently exclude anyone.
What's most important is the soul, and focusing on that should be our main priority. And when it comes to our faith, our principles and our values should precede any form of religious practices that might hold us back. So thank you for letting me.